Hello and welcome to Succeeding in Games Job Seeking 2024. I'm Lizzie Mintus and we have Gina Jaio and Amir Satvat here. We wanted to start by giving you all an introduction and an update from us on the industry. Amir, do you want to lead?
Thank you, Lizzie and Gina. It's great to have the opportunity to be with you both today. Hi, everybody. I'm Amir Satvat. I am the Director of Business Development for Tencent Games in North America, as well as the leader of Amir Satvat's games community. And what updates can I give? We've been doing some interesting things in the community. I'll just pick two or three. We most recently had a big exercise where, for the first time ever, I geomapped all the roles in the games industry. That's interesting. We can talk about that later as of interest. We added a new games jobs resource where now, in addition to long form resources, we show you on a week-to-week basis what are the new jobs that are coming up for people to apply with. And we also are kicking off other resources like Seth Sivak talking about how to start a new games company, Ali Farah having his own game segment on our website, and Ali and Aida augmenting our early career resources. So always trying to be thoughtful about adding more tools and interesting analysis that are interesting to people in the game space.
I guess I should introduce myself, everyone. I'm Gina Jaio. I'm a director of recruiting at Dreamhaven. I'm also currently doing a temporary assignment covering a maternity leave for production. So I'm doing production work in addition to some light recruiting. Super excited to be able to learn something new. And I'm also recently co-founder of AAPI in gaming. Basically, our platform is to amplify voices in the Asian American and Pacific Islander space. In the gaming industry, we promote cultural appreciation. We also highlight representation in games and any related content in that space as well. So check us out at AAPI in Gaming.
Congrats on the new role. We're going to dive into this a little bit more. And everybody is saying hello in the comments. Hello. Thank you for being here. We'll get into QA in just a minute. I'm Lizzie Mintus. I am the founder and CEO of Here's Waldo Recruiting. We are a boutique video game recruitment firm. We focus on North America and Europe. We hire everything in games, game adjacent tech, and we hire mid-level through executive. And I also run the Here's Waldo podcast, where I interview executives, founders, and investors about what they have learned from being in the game industry and what their area of expertise is. I just had David Brevik, who thought up Diablo in high school, on my podcast. Gina has been on my podcast. They're about 7. Thank you all for being here. So we would love to... Do you want to give some more updates on the industry? We'd love to give you some updates on what we're seeing, and then mostly have an opportunity to answer everybody's questions on job seeking.
Yeah, maybe to your point, Lizzie, everybody, we were talking in the pre-chat and we really want to focus as much as we can on QA, but maybe I'll just offer one or two quick thoughts and then invite Gina to do the same. I want to strike a little bit of a note of optimism today. I know that's easy to say when we have so many thousands of friends who are still looking. And I know all three of us feel that pulse every single day and every single week. But I have been saying consistently for the past 12 to 13 months that I was cautiously hopeful that the run rate of jobs, the break even in terms of new roles coming in versus roles unfortunately being cut, would hit a break even in Q4 24. And now we could start filling in that cavernous hole of the roles had been lost starting at the end of this year. Per the projection that I share an update every week on amirsatvat.com, which is a time series projection that uses every little bit of data that I have from the community, millions of pieces of data at this point. Consistently, the numbers have been holding up to the projections, and I do indeed believe that this is a turning point. Does that mean layoffs are going to stop? No. Does that mean there's still too many folks out of work? They still are. But I believe we are going in the right direction. The second quick note that I will make, per what I said about that geographic exercise, and any of you can feel free to ping me for even more info, but what was eye-opening about that resource, which we're also talking about a little bit in pre-chat, is I can't stress enough the importance of flexibility. We have really solid data showing that at this point, now that I know where every role is in the world in game, only 18% of roles are now remote, less than I thought. I thought it was in the 20s. In the United States, half the roles are in California alone. And if you take the top 5 states and regions, California, Quebec, Washington State, British Columbia, and North Carolina, that's 71% of the jobs in the United States and Canada. you also double to triple your chances of finding a job, if not more, depending on the person and function, if you look outside games. So I know it's easy to say one is doing these things, but it is so important. And if you are not geographically flexible and you are not looking outside games, you could be putting yourself at a 2 or 3% chance out of 100 to everybody else of finding a job. So I guess those are my two.
I can definitely add to that, Amir. I think people are wanting to stay in games. I totally understand that. I think the challenge right now is that there's just not as many opportunities. And I think people are really missing some great opportunities out there by not expanding themselves and being like, I really want the same job. I think Lizzie, you and I talked about this as well. I want the same job that I had at that past company. And unfortunately, that's probably not going to happen immediately. Now, games will always be here and there's always a path back. I think it's always important to look at yourself and say, what are my strengths? What are things I have skills in? What are things I need to work on? And take a self-assessment before you enter the job market, because you can give yourself opportunity to, hey, there's other things I could do, be it project management type of work. Even game engines are now being used in other industries. You can still continue to level up those skills and then eventually make your way back into games, but don't sell yourself short by only focusing on specific types of roles in games. So I'm seeing a lot of that, unfortunately, but there's always a path back. And if you're still employed at a game company, but you're worried about the future, this is a time to start looking even internally at your company, seeing what other things you might be able to expand into. The technology is changing. And if you're not evolving, if you're not growing, you are going to be stuck. You might be left behind when things happen and things change. And I was talking a little bit about, I'm in a production role right now. And it's a conversation I had months ago with my boss and say, hey, like I've been doing recruiting for 18 years and I never thought myself of doing something different. However, I've always had interest in going on the game development side. I'm supporting game developers, but I always wanted to see how it was. And so I said, I did an interview like many years ago for a production coordinator role and it didn't get it. And I decided that I would stick to recruiting, but they remembered that. And so when someone on my team went on maternity leave, or someone at Moonshot went on maternity leave, they asked me to join as a producer. And so I'm actually learning how to be a producer internally. If I were to apply for a production job externally, I would never get a production job. Take your opportunity to really assess what the skills you can actually bring to another type of discipline, whether you're at a company now or if you are looking for different types of work. There are other things you can do, and there are skills that you've learned that you probably didn't realize that you can actually apply to other types of disciplines.
I love your story. And we were talking about this a bit before the show too. It's always a lot easier if you are employed and you do want to try something else to try that internally. Like I see people all the time, they're like, I've mentored people, but I really want a management role next. It's like all the people that are applying for this job already have all this experience already. So it's quite hard to compete and change to something completely unrelated externally. You have a lot higher chance of doing that internally, being able to validate that, and then being able to switch. But that being said, like Amir said, if you've been working at a company and let's say you were laid off from a company and you maybe realize it or not, but you were in a good position at that company and there was great pay, great benefits, all of the things that you wanted, like Gina said too, it's probably not going to be the job that you are going to find next. So I do want to highlight that flexibility is really important. And I have a podcast, I've interviewed 70 of the top game execs, and almost everybody has had a point where they've been asked to do something that they don't know or something that's outside of their comfort zone. And almost everybody just says, yes, I can do that thing. Yes, I can learn that thing. Yes, let me pivot and go this other direction. And it doesn't completely derail their career. In fact, it just opens up new doors. Be open to different possibilities and don't get stuck on, I had this thing, I made this total comp or whatever it was, because there's many other options that you could take.
Yeah, and I'll just go very quickly. Thanks for the note on the noise gate. We're all using a new app, so I fixed that. To the question about data for European folks, I'll give you a quick shot of that for the geo stuff. Just very quickly, apologize for going back. In terms of Europe, I can tell you that the top 5 countries, England, Poland, France, Germany, and Sweden, have 60% of the jobs. And in terms of the top cities, London, Warsaw, Barcelona, Paris, and Stockholm, just those 5 cities in Europe have 30% of the jobs. So in terms of concentration, maybe that gives you something to chew on, and we could always talk about more detail offline.
We have another question. How does one penetrate the game industry for marketing opportunities without a reference or internal connection?
I can start with that one, and if you guys want to jump in afterwards. I think people have an idea that if you're at a gaming studio, that the marketing roles are very specific to gaming, and that's very true. However, if you're looking at big AAA studios, there are marketing functions that do not require previous gaming development experience, and that is usually on the business operations side. There are even a big AAA company has retail marketing divisions, and so there's a lot of other disciplines that don't require the specific type of role. So I would think people need to realize that if you're working at a big game studio, there's a lot of people there that don't actually come from games, and they were able to get in to a game studio based on their particular discipline, and then we're able to move to a role that was a little bit more gaming specific. It is very possible to still go into a game studio without the direct gaming development marketing experience, but you have to look for those opportunities that are able to pinpoint the things that you have experienced. I don't know exactly what kind of marketing you've been doing, but there's so many, it's such a wide area. There's retail marketing, there's product marketing, there's brand marketing, a lot of gaming adjacent companies also. We've hired people from gaming adjacent companies to go into gaming. So if you work for peripherals or esports, it's much easier to go into those particular industries and then go into games from there. So it's definitely like a multi-step a situation if you eventually want to get into specific marketing for game development.
Yeah, I think those are great points from Gina. I would just add that this point of adjacent functions, those many of you who I've talked to a bunch, I hit this drum a lot, which is as someone who didn't break and took more than 15 years to break into the games industry because of geographic reasons, I know that the breakthrough point for me was being at a big company like Amazon and being in a business development function and business development and strategy and doing almost the exact same thing or similar things, but just not in games. And now it's what I often think is for the hiring manager and recruiter, how many hoops are you making them jump through? If you have every functional expertise, but you just don't have it in that vertical, with a background like this, I can probably convince people that I know something about video games. But if I also don't have the expertise in business development, now I'm making the person jump through two hoops. So I think that getting as close as you can to it just being a vertical crossover is the easiest step. And I have found that particularly for later career people, excuse me, that can be the easiest at larger tech companies. One other quick thing I'll say that we were talking about in the pre-chat, which I think was a really good comment that Lizzie and Gina were raising, is that people don't discover who you are out of thin air. And I've been a big proponent of talking about events. I know that can be hard because there are costs and things to going there, but there is no cost to posting on social media, to having a presence, to having a blog. I know it's hard to put yourself out there, but believe me, particularly in this last 2 to 3 years with the ecosystem of the three of us and so many friends I see on the call, so many of us have become recognized, not because we have some magic or fireballs coming out of our ears, but because we just started posting one day and we didn't stop. Having name recognition matters for a lot as well.
Very true. Back to the original question, I think that you could also figure out how you can get involved in the game industry. And I like your hoop thing, Amir. Explain the jump. So if you are working in a marketing function somewhere else, on your resume, you can say, I have done all of these skills that cross over. I am passionate about the game industry. And here is my portfolio. Here is some marketing I did for an indie studio for free. Here is something extra that shows that you really care. And then you are making the connection very apparent for the recruiter, because as a recruiter, Gina gets the pleasure of looking through job applicants. I do not, because I'm more of a headhunter, but you do not have that much time to make a first impression. Someone told me 5 seconds when I started recruiting. I thought, that's horrible, but it's not that long. Maybe it's a little bit longer, but it's not very long. So make it a really easy transition for somebody. And go ahead.
Oh, sorry, Liz. I just want to add that kind of being involved in the community, like you mentioned, being present, but also community events, game jams. There's a ton of activity in your community that you can be involved in. And that's not only a great way to network, but also to say, hey, like I do care about the industry. I'm actually helping these people get involved, volunteer my free time to do, and that shows up a lot when I'm looking at resumes and cover letters and people who actually show the passion of wanting to evolve the games industry. That is an avenue. And not only will you benefit from that, but you also will level up in terms of your own understanding of the community, what's happening around you. The development process is super important. If you haven't worked in a game studio, this is a great way to see for yourself how people collaborate. So don't forget to do that. And there's so many ways to get involved. And it's time. I know it's time consuming. It's taking time away from looking for a job, but it will pay off tenfold if you are involved, if you are out there. Helping other people is a huge step. I think that's another way to be involved, is helping others. And maybe you don't have a specific thing you can help people directly, but if you can be a sounding board for people, if you have a specific discipline you can help people with, you need to get out there and make yourself known that way, and it will just help you. And for me, when I help people, like, I grow, and I love seeing other people grow as well. So that's another avenue that everyone can explore.
Yeah, and rep the work that you do. I'm so proud of the work that Gina does with AAPI. And one thing that's amazing to me is, and you might think, oh, who would care about that? But they do care. For example, I felt silly doing it, but I added a company page for our community on LinkedIn because people who do mentoring for our community had told me. And at first I was like, no, you're like joshing me. But I looked into it. I have now had a appreciable number of people in our community who literally put that they mentor or coach in our community on their resume. And I have had hiring managers tell me that they appreciated that. And so it's Jalissa's riffing in chat and dropping gems here with Game Jams, Game Talk Unlocked. It's, you almost can't miss. It's, look, these things do not substitute. If a job says you need 10 years of experience in whatever and you have zero, it's not going to close that gap. But again, I'm glad you like that metaphor, Lizzie. It goes back to the hoops. If you have everything else, what's that edge going to be? And I think you would be really surprised, and I see it every week, how doing these extra things on top matter.
And you can get creative. I think conferences are a great way to meet people. If you can't afford to go, you could message them and ask if you could volunteer. I used to have an entry-level job somewhere, and I couldn't afford to go work out at my workout studio. And so I told them I would clean. I was like, hey, would you do a clean trade? And they gave me a free membership, and I cleaned every week, and it was awesome. But you can do that for a conference. You can get creative. There's Global Game Jam. There's networking events probably in your local community somewhere, depending on where you live. Maybe if you live in one of the places Amir mentioned, there will be more, but there's so many ways to just get yourself out there. We were also talking about, there are a lot of people that have just entered the game industry and we all know who they are. Some of them are in the chat and we are so impressed with you because you're putting yourself out there, you're commenting, you're engaging, but I know who you are and so does everybody else. And that's going to make it so much easier to get a job and to break into the industry if you are already a familiar face. So keep it up. Great work.
Yeah, and for a, oh, go ahead,
Oh,
Gina, please.
sorry, Amir. You can go ahead.
No, please, after you.
Thank you. I think people also are like, I'm not introverted. I'm introverted. I'm not extroverted. I don't like putting myself out there. Like, I'm actually more introverted than extroverted, believe it or not. And I prefer talking to people one-on-one versus a big public setting. But you don't have to necessarily be the same engagement as everyone else. You can actually just comment on people's posts. You can just start engaging people that way. You can have direct chats with them. On Discord or even DMs. I think that's a good way to start. You don't have to self out there having this giant blog or anything like that. That's very daunting. Take baby steps. When you start getting used to it and then you do more and more, don't be freaked out by that. There's ways to be engaging without having to be full on extroverted. Just want to quick note on that.
Yeah, and all these points that everyone is making, look, it's very hard to break down the gap of traveling to an event, but between all the resources of the whole network, right? The thing I love most about everything that is going on now is not about me or Lizzie or Gina or anybody in the chat. It has really become a community, and all of us have a pulse of what is going on with these events. Like for our community alone, and many other people have done stuff, I think we will have given away free tickets to 10 events this year. And I think 3 or 4 of the ones that we did were literally because someone in our community was like, I want to go to this show and I can't afford it. And I was like, don't worry, I will personally write the event organizer for you and see if we can get free passes. That's why Nordic Games ended up, for example, giving us 100 tickets because one person in Sweden told me they wanted me to go, and then 100 people ended up going. And I think Jalissa makes a good point too, that the admission definitely matters for some things, but there's oftentimes things happening around the events and the community knows. I even know for GDC, for example, for a number of people who wanted passes but couldn't go, there were several groups we had in the community who carpooled or got together hotels and stuff like that. So make up your mind on an event that you want to go to, and either between reaching out yourself or everybody we have here together, if you really want to go, we will do the best we can to possibly get you to go there.
Person of the Year award goes to Amir. We have a few more questions. Eric is asking, he heard in the investment side, there seems to be a lot more positive compared to GDC back in March. Is this the case from your time on the floor at Gamescom? I avoided the floor for the most part at Gamescom, not a big crowds gal, but yes, there are a lot of new funds that have been launched, and hopefully interest rates will drop this month and things will pick up. It's been rough for a while. So I think the mood that I saw was a lot more positive than GDC. Let's go for some more questions. Eric says, if you are looking to join indie startups in the marketing space, I'd also add experience or a real enthusiasm for guerrilla marketing and understanding the power of platforms like Steam and Kickstarter. Yes. Wendy Prattner, hello. Nice to see you. Would love to hear your thoughts on how to choose effective professional development opportunities while job seeking. For me, I have been looking at gaps I have and where I want to be goals.
I could start with that one. I think it does really depend on what type of discipline as well. There's like, it could be a combination. It's not just, there's not one stop shop, I think, for all of that. I think it's like through mentorship, it's through, there's also like a ton of like workshops you can either pay for or free tutorials online. There's obviously a lot of GDC talks and things of that nature. There's also certifications. It really depends on what you're looking for. I would say employers in games are not necessarily looking at all like certifications or anything like that. It's more about the things that you're picking up like organically and showing that you understand like something. You don't necessarily have to be like an expert Scrum, but if you've taken courses on your own, if you've worked on small indie groups, that's going to help contribute. So it really depends on what your discipline is. Like, for example, like in my journey right now, learning to be a producer, like I know nothing about production, but people are teaching me, and I'm taking time to also look through tutorials, and I'm trying to figure out like what my production process is and methodologies. I understand kind of the basics, but I don't have those experiences that many of you do. But for me, it's more about making sure that I'm reaching out to mentors at the company, that I'm going out also seeking understanding of generally like what does production look like in different companies. So it's going to be a multitude of different things and a hybrid approach as well.
Yeah, there's a funny metaphor here, and I'm a pretty blunt person. I often think that I think a helpful process for me is thinking through whether something you're doing is actually for skill acquisition or whether it's for credentialing. For example, I went to undergraduate business school, right? When I went to college, everything that I was doing was actually for skill acquisition, finance, accounting, and so forth. When I got my MBA, I actually basically got my degree because of credentialing. That's the reason that I went there. Most of the stuff that I learned was similar to what I was doing. Now, if I extend that to other examples, a classic one that I used to see for a while when I was doing a stint as a producer is people would pay for these very expensive programs for like Scrum training, or saying that they had training in project management and so forth. And when I asked around, there again is no right or wrong answer. Some people learn well in those types of structured programs, so you have to find what's right for you. But most of the people I talked to who had worked in those fields for a long time were like, no way, just read this, talk to this person, do that. But some people want that because in lieu of maybe they don't want to go to graduate school or they can't afford to go to graduate school. Again, it's not good or bad. They want to have that credential on there. And so I would keep that in mind of, is it the credential? Is it the education? Is it the rare case where it's both? And rather than guessing what people value, I think the most valuable thing is to ask them, right? We have almost 2,400 people for you within our community for free community coaching. Pick 5 of them in the field that you're interested in and just ask them. Be like, I'm in this situation. I'm trying to go to this situation. And then ask them both. Ask them, what would you do if I wanted to actually learn how to do these things? And in terms of a signaling mechanism that I have competency or I have whatever it is I'm trying to signal, what would you do? And then see what those people say. I think that might help.
Yes, I just talked to a very sweet military veteran who had broken into the production industry and was laid off and having a hard time finding a job. And my advice was, could you find other veterans who are producers who are further in their career and then ask them about their career path? So I think it's important to figure out, what is your end goal? What is it that you want? And who around you has done that successfully? And people are very willing to help if you approach them in the right way, which would be like, hey, admire your career, something really personable. I am doing this and looking to break in to do XYZ like you did. Would love 15 minutes of your time to hear more about your journey. And a lot of people will not respond. And if they don't respond, we were talking about this before the show. Amir is amazing with LinkedIn. I am personally could be better. I cannot possibly. Amir does it, so I could possibly, but I found it very challenging to respond to every single person. But people might be overwhelmed with their LinkedIn, or maybe they've taken a job in production and they're not doing recruiting so much anymore, and so they're not on LinkedIn as much. So a lot of people won't reply, but that's okay. It doesn't mean they're ghosting you. It doesn't mean they don't like you. In fact, they probably most likely did not even see it. So keep asking.
I think the more specific people are with questions, the easier people will respond. Like I noticed that, like for me personally, I know some people I need to get back to, also people on LinkedIn. I promise I will. But the more specific you are with your ask, the easier, and people will be able to respond right away. So try to be less vague and just, hey, like very like bullet points. Do you have time to talk about this? I'm very curious about this specific thing, your experience. How did you do that? People love talking about themselves. Definitely ask them those specific questions. They will, if they have the time, will respond. That's been my experience.
Somebody asks, is Lightbox a good place to network for the game industry specifically?
Yeah, Lightbox is a newer, like I think people have gone to like CTN in the past. Lightbox is a great, it's in Pasadena, usually at the Pasadena Convention Center once every year. It is more artistic focused, and I think it's great. It's smaller, but it's a great way to start networking with people. I recruited there in the past also when I was at Blizzard. Highly recommend going there. An easier environment it's more artist friendly. I think there's some complaints about other events that are less artist friendly and very expensive, but Lightbox takes all that consideration, and I would highly recommend it.
Thank you. Chris Novak, hello. Good to see you. So many friends on this. The game industry is the best. Chris says a huge advantage is the ability to point to something you've built and to be able to speak to the trade-offs you made while building it. This doesn't need to be a game. It can be almost any artifact. I think that's true. Just showing that you are doing something on your own time and you are curious and you are interested to learn more is an underlying skill that most companies are going to look for, especially if you haven't done the thing already. We have another vote for Person of the Year for Amir. Teen says, I've been a real quiet person and I'm going to volunteer to a volunteer event in a couple weeks. Any tips for a first timer? I'll have free time during the event as I'll be editing the video afterwards.
As an introvert, I would say, I know it seems daunting to be in an event and see people around and talk to them, but even just strike a casual conversation. If you notice something about someone, if they're wearing like a shirt, hey, like I recognize that like anime or show or something, or if they're wearing like a bag that you recognize, just strike up a casual conversation and like ask them like, hey, is your first time at this event? It's my first time. Would you have any tips? Ask them questions, ask them for help. That's a good way to start. So I think that would be a good way to get yourself out there and don't be afraid to have a conversation. Once you get over the awkward silence, and you're gonna feel a lot better.
Yeah, honestly, I'll tell you something, and I tell this people all the time, and they don't believe me. But of course, those who know me closest, especially my parents and my partner Jess, know this. I am like still to this day on the inside, believe it or not, a very shy person. I find it like mortifying to be in like large groups. Like when I go to events like Gamescom, I literally take like short breaks after every few hours just to re-energize myself. And so I don't know if you find this comforting, but I find it comforting, which is I know how many people come up to me at events and I always really appreciate it. But I also know that is like an acquired skill that I've built up over time, because naturally, if I was at like a party, I would be the person hanging over in the corner with the 2 to 3 people that he knows, like basically not approaching anybody. But I've learned to do it because I genuinely like meeting people, even though I'm just on the inside like a shy person. And so don't feel like cut yourself a break that every person out there is like Gordon Gecko and like naturally wants to go up and talk to everybody, because that's not true. And so many other things in this world, if you inherently like people but just feel shy about it, it is absolutely a skill that you can build up over time. And I work in freaking business development, so if that's not a testament to the fact that you can do it, I promise you can. Just take some practice.
I'm really a people person. My parents are really introverted, and when I was a kid, they would take me places to talk to people for them. So I love to talk to people. But after the pandemic, I remember the first events I would go to, I'd be like, oh, first of all, I'd be like, I don't really want to go. And then I'd go and be like, oh, should I leave? But like you get over it after a while. But what I did to make myself feel better, I would look at the invite list. Usually there's an app, or you can find on LinkedIn, you could search who's going to PAX or who's going to whatever you're going to in the search bar, and then connect with a few people that I wanted to meet and send them a message that I was going. So then I at least had a few familiar faces that were warm and not cold that I could already talk to. And then I did a podcast. It's maybe all I'll talk about, but I did a podcast with the CEO of Wiggy, Joni Kraut. And she said it's great to practice your pitch ahead of time and say who you are, what you're doing, and what you're hoping to get in a very short, succinct way, or what you're looking for, basically how people can help you. Because if people don't know who you are and they don't know what you're seeking, they can't help you. But people are very kind, someone said in the comments, in the game industry, and really willing to help. You just have to be able to show people what it is that you need. Okay. Being willing to learn something out of your comfort zone is important. Yes, and also a lot of people have imposter syndrome, and many people are feeling very uncomfortable. And who you have imposter syndrome about, or if you ever have that, I found they often may have imposter syndrome about you. So it's going both ways. So it's really important to remember that.
Yeah, the imposter syndrome thing, I really can't stress this enough. It's not just about the shyness stuff. I could really say about anything. I don't know. I think one of the most comforting things that I've found, and this has not even anything to do with games, having been a professional for 20 plus years, is realizing that if you're in any room in any situation, whatever you're feeling, at least one other person in the room is probably feeling it too. If you're feeling nervous, they are too. If you're feeling shy, they are too. If there's like a business decision and you're not exactly sure what the decision should be, you're not exactly sure what the facts are, they are too. In fact, I really believe that one of the biggest skills that senior people have is they learn to basically mask that entirely externally. And I would actually say, I think that people should do the reverse, which is I actually think if more senior people showed vulnerability and showed on the outside what they were actually feeling on the inside, it would make them feel much closer to other people. So that's why I always try to do that. I think Lizzie and Gina do a great job of that too. But like, never assume that you're the only one in the room feeling a certain way, because I promise you, you never are.
And the more you do the uncomfortable thing, the easier it is. When I started recruiting, I remember the first candidate, I had to tell him he didn't get the job. And I was so nervous to make that call because it's not a pleasant conversation usually. It's obviously very important information to convey, but it gets easier and easier. And I was really freaked out of public speaking, and I felt like I was going to black out, and I felt nauseous and I felt nervous, but I hired some coaches. I worked on it a lot. I recorded myself and I did it, even though it was very scary. So most people are feeling scared about the things that they're doing, especially if they're talking in front of people, or you're like, wow, this person may be accomplishing a lot here. They're probably really freaked out about it. But the more that you do it, the more comfortable you feel. And then you gain some more confidence as you keep doing that thing. And eventually it's just something that you do. And then you realize, hey, I don't even feel scared about doing this thing anymore. You just have to force yourself to practice, even when it's really uncomfortable.
100%. And just to add, I think I certainly suffer from imposter syndrome as well. And especially when I first joined Blizzard, and I had to meet all the like high level executives and like the lead designers and game directors. And I remember sitting down with Dustin Browder being freaked out, like he's the guy that was working on all these amazing games. But I think thinking about like, there's a reason why you're there. And he made me very comfortable by saying, you're the recruiting expert. I'm here to work with you. And I look to you as a consultant, as a person to guide me through this process. And you have to realize that there is a reason why you're there, that they're looking to you for advice, for your knowledge. And but also realizing that there are things you don't know. And it's okay to admit that. And I think I've found in my career that like if I don't know something, I'm going to call it out and say, I'm not very familiar with this process. Can someone educate me? And that's the kind of willingness to admit these kind of things and hey, can someone fill me in on this? I'm not very strong in this area, but they know that you're vulnerable, but also your capabilities. You have a lot of awareness. I think people also lack a lot of self-awareness sometimes, and that hurts them in their careers. And so it's about like your approach on what I know, what I don't know, and being transparent about that. And I think that is a difference between someone who's super skilled in their job and maybe they're great at their job, but maybe they don't realize that they have these shortcomings and they don't like to admit these shortcomings. And I would rather much work with someone who knows their shortcomings, who understands like what they can do, what they can't do, than someone who's like the rock star.
Yeah, I think being humble is really important. There's a great comment from Jack in the chats that says it helps to practice my social skills. I have had a rough go of it when I was younger because of my Asperger's syndrome, but I've learned that looking for that connection point where I can overlap with someone and open the door to a conversation. Thank you for sharing that. I think that's an important thing to hit on. I have a really great personal friend who also has Asperger's, and the first time that I met them, they told me, hey, this is my name and I have Asperger's. And I was like, oh, this is wonderful because now I know the way to interface with you, right? I understand. And they're like, hey, I might not get this social situation. So if this happens, just know that I don't understand. And that was really amazing for me to know how to interface with them. And I'm sure that takes confidence and is not something I can personally relate to, but I was just really impressed with the ability for somebody to share about them and be really upfront at the beginning so I could know the right way to talk to them.
Yeah, and Jack, I might add, not only in my own family and friends, but amongst my colleagues in the industry, as you probably know, I can't even count how many I know that have something within ASD. And, they're awesome. They're amongst the best colleagues I have. I think everybody knows that. And I might add that I am really proud that in 2024, people talk about those things openly and talk about them with great pride as they should, and everyone can see them as the superpowers that they are. I hope that you know that is an ever present, everyday thing that I see in my job that I just take for granted now, if you didn't already know that.
Yeah, it is amazing. And I think it's great to also share that in an interview process. I once had a candidate ask for additional feedback and explain to me that they were virgin and had a hard time understanding things, and this would really help them. And we were actually able to dive in a lot deeper and really help this person. So if you're comfortable, I really encourage you to let people know how to work with you.
Plus one that, and as a recruiter who worked in many different companies, if someone had shared that with me ahead of time, like people have, if there was an easier way for them to digest information, they would also say, I prefer some of these, I prefer to have a pause between questions so I could really process a question. So it's not this awkwardness. It's like that way we know ahead of time to give them time to think about it. So please let us know, as even any recruiter you talk to, we're here to help you. And so if you feel that your interview needs additional information beforehand, just let us know ahead of time and we're here to help you. So I've been able to do that with many of my candidates who've let me know ahead of time, and it's been super helpful.
And Sean, you're right. There is ASD shaming and it's disgusting, but the tide is turning. And if I think about every 5 years, and since I came out working, the tide is absolutely turning. And I would say the past two workplaces I've been within Amazon and Tencent, I think that I'm, again, very direct. When people deserve the lowest marks, I've seen the highest marks in terms of how people make people just feel completely seamless within workplace. Rudy, you said it, superpower, and people are going to be brought to light. There's no corner to run for people to shame anybody for anything. Just, I want to see them try to do it in front of me. They'll see what it looks like when I get angry. You don't want to see me when I get angry.
I have another question that's quite specific. Hi, I'm from Italy and I can speak English, though it's more academic. I'm interested in applying for a junior game programmer positions at various international companies. Despite my concerns about relocating, language, and finding a place to live in a far off and very different country, I believe it might be the best move for me. Unfortunately, opportunities in Italy are quite limited. Do you think I should go for it?
I'll say one thing, and I'm curious what Gina and Lizzie might say. Look, there's a personal component to it that is deeply personal that I think you need to decide for your family, for financial components and stuff like that. What I always like to say is I give the data and you make the best decision based upon those constraints, which you will know better than any of us. Here's what I can tell you of the all the jobs that I profiled within the industry, there are 20 jobs open out of almost 14,000 jobs that are in Italy. So you are in fact correct that there are a very small number of jobs in Italy. So I can tell you that if your goal is taking on that opportunity at this point in time in September 2024, you are in a relatively disadvantageous position because you would only have those jobs plus the ones that are remote available. And so I would say that depending upon your openness of moves, targeting one of those areas within that spreadsheet, as I suggested, of where the jobs are concentrated, like some of those areas in North America, like some of those areas that we cited that are most plentiful, like England, Poland, France, Germany, Sweden, etc. Whatever is a reasonable move for you, certainly that would put you at a major statistical advantage. That's what I can say.
Yeah, I think plus one, Amir. I think also it'd be really helpful if you understand like the different requirements for different countries in terms of visa requirements as well. Being very familiar with that ahead of time, because we talk to recruiters, certain countries require specific things, and the more knowledgeable you are with that, and the more armed you are, like even talking to an attorney, some general questions, and having them answer that would put you at a huge advantage, because then you understand, okay, I need this and that to go to this country. I need to work in the US. I need this. That's also something to consider that a lot of people don't know to look into ahead of time, because it can be pretty complicated, but it would help you as a candidate. And I would also like, in terms of what Amir was saying, to really think about these other locations. And it's not going to be forever. Once you get the experiences, you can always go back to Italy, and it'll be a lot easier to come back and be able to have experiences and be able to apply for positions that are actually located in your home country. So it's not forever. To think about that too. It actually would be a great experience to work in a different country and then bring that back to potentially an office there and be able to apply those skills. So I would say go for it.
I'm jealous you live in Italy, first of all. That sounds like a dream. And this is, again, a very personal decision, and you need to do some soul searching. And if you do decide to do it, I think setting yourself up for success would be really key. So, what area are you going to move to? Who can you meet in that area ahead of time that's going to help you? Can you network with people in Amir's list? Can you find some meetups in that area to get involved in right away? Because you may be able to move without a job. You may not sure on the visa requirements based on where you want to live. That's a really great point. But to already set yourself up with a community, so you will have a much higher chance of finding a job a lot faster if you've already done the legwork while you are in Italy, and then you have a plan once you get there.
Yeah, and if I could just really quickly say while Lizzie looks for the next conversation point, like again, some of these things that we talk about, like finding that sweet spot of not being too narrow, but also not applying to everything. I really think, based upon all the conversations I've had with everybody, I think we could all take more time to slow down and really think about what our constraints are. As I famously talk about a lot on LinkedIn, I knew, and this is a trade off with a lot of constraints and reductions that I accepted at a very young age, that I was not going to leave the Northeast United States. And basically, now at this point in my life, the only place that I will live is Farmington, Connecticut, unless I'm financially incapable of doing so. I can't imagine what percentage of roles are taken off the table for me that are inaccessible to me because I've made those choices. Thank God I have had the opportunity to do that because things have worked out thus far. But that meant that I didn't get to work in the industry that I've been obsessed with since I was 3 until I was, in my late 30s. So you may decide that you live in place X and that matters a lot to you. You may decide that absolutely doesn't matter at all. I think really asking yourself those questions. What comp reduction, to go back where Gina kind of started about what role did I have before and what am I going to be with OK? I think constantly asking yourself and re-asking yourself those questions, so you both don't have too narrow of a funnel, but you also don't sacrifice yourself for things that you actually don't want to do to the extent that you have the luxury to do it. I realize in some situations one doesn't have that luxury at all, and I've been there too, but when you do, be thoughtful about it.
Absolutely. I think a lot of times I talk to people from a recruiting standpoint and I ask them what they want and they tell me that they don't know. And it's okay not to know, but the conversation with any recruiter is going to be a lot more productive unless you're happily employed and I'm, headhunting you, that would be a little bit different. But if you're actively job seeking, have your resume prepared, think about what the things you are going to want the most are. And even as you start getting in the interview process, really identify yourself and with your family or anyone else, your loved ones that may have consideration. Is it okay to relocate? What is going to work? What kind of job do you want? Do you need remote flexibility? Do you need to meet a certain salary requirement? Do you need to work on a certain kind of project or you hope to? And the more clear you can be about what it is that you want, the more likely you are to get there. And then the more able you are to find the person that can also help you and mentor you and guide you who has done that before. So it's okay to not know right now, but I really encourage you to start figuring that one out.
I think plus one, and have it like written out. This is not just a mental like thought process. Like I found like writing things out, and actually you don't have to do this to extreme, but spreadsheets like, okay, this is a thing that I'm really need, and I can't budge from this, but I'm open to these things. They're much more flexible. And using that as a template to, when you look at opportunities, like what can I actually be flexible on? What can't I be flexible on? And I did this when I had opportunities. And when I was leaving Disney, I had an offer from Riot and Blizzard. And I literally built the spreadsheet out. Okay, what are the advantages? And I did not want to move to LA. That was like something I really didn't want to do. So I really wanted to move to Orange County. So I was like, one of my prioritize those kind of things too. Like you can build a prioritization for yourself, what's really important to you, and be able to move from there. I also think people need to be a little bit more flexible in this, especially in this day and age right now. I think there's like a lot of willingness. Okay, I really want this, but the reality sets in, and knowing what your true skill set is, what people observe you as. And to your point, Lizzie, ask your friends and former coworkers, what do you think I do? And what are the skills that am I really good at? What do I need to improve on? And be honest and with yourself. Like maybe it would be hard to hear that, but you need to hear from other people, because sometimes you just have these blinders on. You don't necessarily see what others are seeing about you. I know it's making yourself vulnerable, but I think it's good for you to hear that. Getting feedback from people, especially now when you're at this crossroads potentially, and taking that into consideration when you're looking at your next job opportunity.
Lizzie, would it be all right if I jumped on a question that Peter Norton asked in the chat? Thank you.
Yeah, you're the boss here. Go ahead.
Thank you. Peter, this is a very good question about having a polished and connected is interesting. I'll riff on that in a second. But let me tell you something. So one of the interesting things about the data for our community and the 2,500 plus people who've been enabled to find jobs by our community, which I'm very proud of everyone for working on that, is that I have an enormous amount of data on what characteristics those candidates shared in common versus not versus others. And there are a lot of things that you might think are determining factors versus not. But interestingly, there's actually only a few that have a very statistically significant impact on job success. I can tell you two of them. The most important one is, do you have a connection in any capacity to the hiring manager or recruiter for that job? That increases your odds in some cases by as much as tenfold versus a general applicant. But interestingly, a second one is, do you have a fully complete and reasonably populated LinkedIn profile? And what I mean by that is every opportunity that you've done, work experience, volunteers, and so forth, filled out with reasonable, short, crisp bullets? Do you have a nice about me section about you and what you do? Do you have a thoughtful banner that's like interesting and a nice profile picture. It would be amazing to you to know when I survey the candidates in our community, how many people have not done that. And I have convincing data that actually suggests, as much as people agonize over their resume or over their cover letter, it actually matters way more if your LinkedIn profile is populated than either of those things, and the resume is actually somewhat functional. So there are other factors as well, but I think it is extremely important. I literally think that's like the first thing you should do before you even apply to other jobs, in my humble opinion.
If you do not have your LinkedIn profile up to date, you should not apply for any job. Have a picture, get someone to take a picture of you. It's okay. Have a headline, have all your jobs listed, and also have the company that you worked at linked. This means if Amir works at Tencent, he could just type in Tencent and it would not link back to the actual company. And then it would just be a gray square. As a recruiter, if I see a bunch of gray squares, I don't look as closely, because to me, it means you worked at companies that maybe don't even exist. So I don't know what that means. And again, if there's any hoop to jump through, it's a lot less likely. So make less hoops, bullet point your experience, make it very clear what you did, what titles you worked on, what your personal contributions were, and what action items you took. And then you could do an About Me section. In your About Me section, if you have changed career, if you had a career break, if you have any maybe elephants in the room, we could call them, anything that people would question, just explain it. This is a great opportunity. And the more you can, the least hoops people can jump through, the more likely you are to get a job.
100% these. And as a recruiter, when I'm sourcing talent and I'm looking at all the profiles and people who don't have anything enlisted, I'm going to pass over. I'd rather focus on someone who actually put in the time in. I know they're also active. I'm seeing that your profile is filled out for the most part and you have some activity. It's showing that you're active on LinkedIn. I can reach out to you and get a response. If you are not showing any information and I don't see any activity at all, I'm not going to reach out to you, because I feel like it's going to go into the another realm. I'm not going to get a response to you. So it 100% is important as a recruiter.
And I also see a lot of people who are like, oh, I have a job, and so I don't need to update my LinkedIn profile. I've never had to update it. I've never had to do a job search. Your company may shut down tomorrow, not to be negative. COVID-19, maybe it's going to be COVID 2024. We don't know what is going to happen. I think we've seen time and time again, work at a big company, work at a small company, work at a well-funded company. Anything at any point in time can go wrong. So it's very important for you to be yourself prepared in case anything bad happens, which means keeping your LinkedIn profile up to date, filling in past work history, putting your school on there, adding people to your network, and commenting and engaging on posts, which is pretty minimal effort. Even just one post a day, just start super easy.
And then I have to say, people are realizing this too late. They are getting laid off and they're like, oh, I should have been more active on LinkedIn. I should have. And it hurts me because we've been telling this, Lizzie and Amir have been telling this, and myself and some people, you need to be active on LinkedIn. You need to have an updated profile. And people are now like out of work and panicking. And it just hurts me that we couldn't help people, or people didn't listen sooner. So don't make that same mistake.
When you need a lawyer and you try and get one, it's already too late.
Yeah, and blending what Lizzie and Gina are saying with something Steve Fowler asked earlier above, good to see you, Steve. He basically, to paraphrase what he said, I teach graduate students about games, and many of them want to get into games, but they're very worried and they're nervous with the downturn. How do they get started? And look, in 2012, I lost my job and I was unemployed for 5 months, maybe 6 months. And at the time, Jess was in graduate school. And so we went from having a very healthy outcome and income in Cambridge to living on, I don't even remember what it was, like an $18,000 graduate stipend, which was the only money we had that is what Jess is making. So I understand what that is like. And certainly I have had people very close to me who have been out of work for longer. And my entire life, basically day and night, as is, I'm sure is true for Lizzie and Gina, is hearing everybody's stories, ranging from the serious to the extremely serious. This is not an easy message to hear, but it is the honest message, which is the wind-up of networking that you need and applications to get a job in games. And then I'll back it off of games, and I'll try to say this quickly because I know we're coming up on time. I believe the wind-up in the most optimistic of scenarios for an average applicant for games is 6 to 12 months. that is the amount of time, in the best case of scenarios, that you need to mentor, to get your brand out there, to apply to jobs, to have time to look for things. And as you all have seen that I've said for early career people, if you're someone out of school, those odds may be as low as 1% to 2%. And so there are modes and moments in time for being selective, and there are moments in time to survive. When I was in Cambridge, it was survive mode, and I didn't care what I did as long as I had a job that provided a paycheck for me and for my wife. And even that sometimes is not enough. Like, many of you are in that survive mode and are trying everything, and these are the situations for which my heart breaks the most. Even with those constraints, you haven't been able to find something for a year plus. And so I guess responding to Steve's question and the advice that I give to younger people is, I am not going to candy coat to you. I am not a game school admissions officer career placement person. You have about a 1 in 50 chance of finding a job in games over the next year. You should absolutely try, but your goal should be to do absolutely anything that allows you to have a place to live and to pay for food and not give up on your dream. I didn't give up on my dream for over 15 years. That doesn't mean that I was a failure, that anything was wrong, that I beat myself up, that I thought that I was making a mistake. I think we need to shift the conversation to just being much more honest with people, that you should almost assume that unless you have worked in games, you are not going to find a job in games for the next year and probably even for the next 2 to 3 years. And your approach should be to take care of yourself financially and keep skills to keep yourself relevant while doing all the things that Lizzie and Gina have been mentioning, so that 6 months to a year to 2 years from now, those odds are not linear. They're actually exponential. If you keep trying, you find the role in 3 years or in 5 years. That is my honest advice, although I know it's hard to hear.
Agree. Thank you so much, everybody, for all of your questions. Really appreciate it. All the LinkedIn Live will be recorded. If you didn't make the whole thing, feel free to rewatch it. The comments will be in there, and I'll try and reply to any additional questions that we can. Thank you for being here, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Good seeing y'all.
Have a great day. Take care.
Thank you very much, everyone.